I just,
Oh,
and we're live.
For 40 years, I've walked the line between worlds and am well versed in death. But I want to have faith in humans. Give me something to believe in. Earth below me, sky above me, fire within me. Brought to you by UPRN Network. I'm Trish Mo, and this is The Missing Piece.
good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Trish, and this is The Missing Piece. We are broadcasting live on 105.3 FM in New Orleans and United Public Radio Network. We are also live on Parapost Network. And it is Monday, September 26th. I do want to thank Carnation for sponsoring an hour of my show as well as the network. And it's already started off. Y'all know my electronic technology frustrations. Goodness. I'm gonna blame the asteroid they just knocked off course. That's it. That's it. Um, Tonight, I'm super excited to welcome back Reverend Jennifer Moore. I call her Jen. Welcome back, Jen. I'm so excited to see you, even though our little glitches in this matrix here.
Yeah, the glitches. Trish, I'm so thrilled to be here too. Thank you so much for having me back. It's like, that first connection was like, oh, I know you. It's just so delightful to be
Are you
here.
happy to be back?
I'm happy to be back. I'm
No.
delighted to be back. Yeah. I'm
People on the radio that
gonna
can't see that, they're like, "What is
what the hell is she
wrong
doing?
with her?"
Yeah, you and I are already punchy and we haven't even started. Yeah, I could light a candle too, so
Yes.
I could do the same thing.
Oh, I can't be trusted with fire right now.
Yeah. Trish has been holding her light underneath her, kind of like a flashlight for telling ghost stories. As you were talking about tech and just the glitchiness of it, I actually have noticed that this is something that some empaths really, really struggle with
Yeah.
is that the tech does weird wonky things, like we can be utterly sort of like just not in calibration with it, and our energy system can really disrupt things that the average muggle can just like
Well,
navigate
I
very
so
easily.
I was talking about that with somebody today because when I had a few heart attacks, and I went to my doctor, my after like as a follow up, I went to my cardiologist, and their office had two EKG machines, and I have, due to numerous probably trauma when I was little and surgeries and stuff, I have anxiety at doctors' offices. So he says, "Okay, we're just going to do a quick EKG on you." He brought his machine in, and he starts to hook it up and gets close to me with it, and it won't even turn on. It powered off. Like he couldn't get it to work. So then he said, "Just a minute," he's like, "That's weird. This was just working, not earlier today or whatever." But he's like, "Let me go get the other one." So he goes and gets the other one. He's like, "I just tested in the other room. Everything's fine." He brings it closer to me, tries to start it, and completely zaps out. And so he's like, I was like, "Sorry?" And then his lights and his TV started flickering. He's like, "Let's get you out of here before you take out all my electronics."
Well, and I'm so glad he could recognize that we have that capacity to
Yeah,
to fritz things. I had a business partner who absolutely hated computers, and and at the time we had just an old school like bubble iMac way back in the day, and it was my computer. Like I owned the computer, but it was for our business, so we shared it. And I had no problem whatsoever. And he was constantly having problems. It was glitching on him nonstop. And in his case, I actually think it was because he sent so much negative energy at the computer. Like he had so much loathing for it that the computer was like, you don't like me, I don't like you. But and I've
I could see that.
yeah, and I've definitely seen that can happen for people if they're really, like when we get really like messed up and confused, it can really just kind of double down on all of it and it just becomes a snowball. I can't wear watches
I can't wear
because
watches.
yeah.
I can't. I really have to. It was a few years ago before I really embraced any of these things, or probably wouldn't have even believed half of them back then. Um, but all my life, and my family knows, everybody, when I would get upset, especially as a little, well, plus I'm a redhead, people just expect when I was little. But I would, trip the breaker, like all the lights would flicker, all kinds of things. And I kept intuitively, or I guess Claire, uh, Claire
Clairsentience is when you feel things
sentience.
and you sort of feel it in your body. Claircognizance is when you just know something.
What's the one that's all of them? It is like all of them at once, because I have
Huh.
I just read this the other day and I was like, huh, well, that makes sense. Um, but I kept hearing uh control your emotions, and I'm like, well, and I live next to a power grid, so that's probably
Mm-hmm.
but but I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. When I'm near power, I need to find a way to control that, because I have been electrocuted and struck by lightning and all that. So uh in order to prevent those things, then it's probably good to learn to do, it's good to learn to do that anyways. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's why you're here
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in learning how to like, that dance between the part of us that if we can calm our own nervous system down, then the outside world can respond to that versus sort of the times and places where, like, for example, as you were saying, you were living really close to a grid.
Mhm.
Who is, I have a dear friend. I'm just seeing a message from Valerie that she can't ever wear watches because the batteries go dead and light bulbs in the house do too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was able to wear a watch for like 2, 3 days and then it would start to lose time and it would just kind of get wonkier and wonkier. And I finally was just like, you know what? I'm not going to spend money on watches anymore because I've never been able to keep one for any period of time. Fortunately, my phone agrees with me. Like there's
I
something
can't
about
touch remotes, like remote controls for TV. I mean, I'll just kill them.
yeah, yeah. In my case, it's more that the remote well, we have a hair trigger remote, so if I touch it, it does things, but I think it's just as much about the remote. But I've got in terms of the grid, I have this friend who she will, as she's coming towards like high tension lines and power lines, she will start getting this feeling in her body and these like really kind of dark thoughts. And a lot of times like she'll like look up and she'll be like, oh, I'm driving under high tension wires, like I'm
Yes.
doing this. So it's that really interesting kind of intersection between the part of us that is affecting things, but then also the part of us that gets affected by things. And it's a really interesting dance to like keep our own sort of center, but especially when you are like really close to the grid and in places where maybe you don't really want to be there.
Well, and right after the shutdown, when all these new 5G towers went up, miraculously during those 2 months or whatever, um, it was right after that that I had another heart attack. And I noticed every time I would come closer to one, it would almost trigger my AFib again.
Mm.
And I got pretty depressed there for a while, because on this earth, And the reason I learned that, I was hiking near a lake in the woods with my friends, and my heart started beating out of rhythm, and I'm like, what in the world is causing that? And we came around a corner, and there was a tower disguised as a tree. It was
Oh,
like a fake, and
those.
the closer I got to it, I'm like, I'm gonna have a heart attack. I can't. So it got pretty depressing there for a while, because I'm like, where am I gonna live? This is it's everywhere. It's
Mhm,
everywhere.
mhm.
I can't go out in nature and get away from this. And there's satellites, and you know, there's entire I didn't I was like, "Well, maybe I'm just the odd one, because it doesn't seem to affect anyone else." I mean, I assume it affects animals, but there's entire groups now and all the reports are like, "Oh, it's no big deal. It can only penetrate your skin up to like so many centimeters." I'm like, "If that's like half your eyeball."
No kidding. No
You know what I mean?
kidding.
And but yeah, there's what would we do? What?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and God bless us as a species. The things we think are good
We're
ideas,
so
like,
foolish.
we really are. I mean, and I just and the ways in which we somehow think that the human ego and human intelligence is the thing that's gonna get out of the mess that the human intelligence and the
Yes.
human ego got us into. But, as you were talking about thinking that you're the only person who is experiencing this kind of distress around, and I totally want to say, like, I was down in North Carolina a couple of years ago when I saw the tree towers for the first time. They are like a perversion. They are
Hmm.
truly
Yeah.
like there is something so wrong,
Exactly.
so wrong with those towers meant to look like trees. It's like you're
Hmm.
not fooling anybody, people. But, I know from knowing so many people that are highly sensitive and empathic, and people who are sort of in the neurodiverse categories as well, who are really sensitive to EMFs and really sensitive to, like, Wi-Fi and
Yeah.
cell phones and being around high tension wires and all of that. And it can affect, for some of us, it's like it affects our heart,
Oh yeah.
it affects our physiology, and then for some people it affects us mentally and can make us just feel really, really out of sorts and uncomfortable and weird. So you are definitely not alone. And I mean, the challenge is, like you said, what do we do
Hmm.
when it seems like as a species we're kind of doubling down on all of this sort of penetrative technology? Like, we're just it strikes me in some ways like that this is almost like the lower octave of the ascension, in the sense that so much of what is happening is that we as a species are going from, like, the 3D and the earth plane into more and more awareness of frequency and elevating into a
Yes.
higher frequency and a higher dimension. And our technology is kind of doing the same thing, but it's kind of through the octave of the human ego or the human experience. But it's kind of like it just strikes me that in some ways the going from, like, analog to digital and now kind of almost into this sort of frequency thing
Yeah.
it correlates with what we are doing, as like the soul's evolution.
Well, and it's been a few years now for me that I've noticed, and it's all of my very close friends too, because my circle's pretty small as far as, but those certain people live halfway across the US from me. We don't see each other for, in person very often. But then I realized those people, like, there's no way we could be, which is really sad actually. Like you and I, we probably couldn't be around each other physically a lot, or like live right next to each other or something, because we're literally like, I don't know, like
Mhm.
we'd probably kill each other. I'm not even joking. Like, the energies are too, it's like overload. It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, you know what I mean? It's like, um if it too high power, two volt, if you're thinking in electricity, literally, yeah,
Yeah.
like too high powered batteries, right? You can't. Or like, a good example, they say with like Teslas and stuff now that you can only have one per like 3 block area or something. Otherwise, it zaps. Yeah, it literally overloads the power grid. So I think of people in that way, like certain people with higher frequencies. You can't have, well, especially if it's like a child or something with a high frequency, because that's like a baby rattlesnake. Like they can't control that. And they're gonna
No,
use
no,
one
no.
outburst, whether happy or sad or otherwise,
Right.
is going to blow the grid. Like,
Yeah.
so,
Well, and
um,
especially at adolescence, I
oh my
mean, and
goodness.
that was one of the things that I think they, even back in the day when people were first starting to study like paranormal stuff and poltergeists, just
Mhm.
like how frequently all of the activity that is going on in a household, there's a tween to young adult going through the hormonal disruptions and all of that
Yeah.
stuff, and just setting like the electrical systems in the house, other objects, I mean, all of it can just be really affected. And I've had people or talked with people over the years where they were dealing with hauntings, that kind of like really disruptive, really weird energy. And I honestly have never had an experience where in talking with people about it, there wasn't a like kind of like 9 to 18 year, like a 9 to 20-year-old, but especially like
Mhm.
9 to like 16-year-old in the household who was going through a lot of stuff. And then in one household where everybody in the house was really sensitive and the mom was a very sensitive person.
That's like my household.
Yeah, it's sort of like electricity, door, like all of it just,
Mhm.
just wacky. But I'm sure, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. It's like you and I are both like, we
Well,
both know there's way more
but
than is
but
dreamt of
but
in our
you're right. It
philosophy.
is a lot of even shadow figures. And I had never considered that until we were interviewing someone on Chasing Prophecy, and there's been a few parapsychologists, is that
Mhm.
um and they had done all this research and said almost like 80%. Now granted, yes, there are entities that are shadows. I'm not saying all of them are, but she said like 80% of shadow figures are a projection of someone in the family usually.
Mm.
It's literally like a manifestation of that you can see, and that actually haunts of something traumatic that has happened, whether it be abuse or whatever. It is such a strong emotional, um it has to projection to cause
Mhm.
that. But they said that's something that and I mean, yes, it could be something, if it's somebody who's lived there before, whatever, if you live in like an apartment complex or something, yes, from someone else. But she was talking about strictly in a home that wasn't previously haunted, to the people who had lived there before, and then the people who move in all of a sudden have all these shadow people. That's
Mhm.
something in the family, which
Mhm.
makes
Mhm.
sense because it's literally like something you're trying to hide that nobody talks about, and the
Right.
truth always comes to light. So
Right.
that would be like your own, yeah, that's literally like the skeletons in the closet type type
Absolutely.
thing.
Well, I was just interviewing a woman who is an experiencer and who has had a lot of experiences with extraterrestrials.
Mhm.
And we were talking about the fact that in her family nobody would talk about it, but
Yep.
everybody was experiencing it.
Yep.
And that it wasn't until she was like well into her adulthood and actually very recently started having conversations and asking family members and being like, have you ever had this? And they're all like, yeah. And so I think that there's also that it does that sort of paranormal experience or seeing these projections. And certainly ETs is different than is not necessarily the same as the shadow people or
Right.
the shadow men, or in, like for me, the tall, thin man, because
Mhm.
it's so fascinating. This is the second time within a week that this conversation about the tall, thin men at the bed has come up. I think about my own, but the point I was going to make was that I think it does tend to run in family systems. Like there's that sensitivity and that awareness. And it's almost like what comes first, the sensitivity to it or the denial of it?
Well, it's interesting you brought that up because, I'm autistic, but I wasn't actually diagnosed until like I was 30, I don't know, which a lot of women aren't. It's
Right.
more earlier diagnosed with. I was very well at masking from a very young age. Um, but what I've found in people that I know, most mediums, most um are probably diagnosed or not, because it's that extra sensory thing, we're sensitive to literally everything. And it's like the sixth sense.
Yeah.
So um it, that's something that runs in the family.
Mm-hmm.
Autism runs in
Mm-hmm.
families.
Right. Right.
Well, if you think about it, back in 50s, 60s, any time up to about the 70s era, it was so common for men, in a traditional, I guess what people can define back then as a traditional family dynamic, for the man to go to work and the woman to, keep house and be a homemaker. Well, so a lot of people like me, I could handle a job. I've been in, like, ran businesses before, and I mean still do, and I'm great at that. But then there's other things, and I think about, like, people in my family, not just like my dad, but grandparents, things like this. I'm like, wow, that, like, they were geniuses at their jobs, could do that great. But then, like they'd be calling me, asking me how to, if my mom or grandma or whoever asked me how to use, like, a washing machine,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
do simple tasks, and that's the whole balance. I think, plus the grounding yourself, kids and adults, anyone. Back in the day, I was outside making mud pies and playing in the dirt, and you know making crafts all the time and doing all these things. Now we just sit people in front of, like, tablets, TVs, whatever. And so I get really triggered as far as my autism if I don't have those things. If I don't go out in nature, if I don't,
Mm-hmm.
play in the dirt and literally, like, hug a tree, whatever. And so there are things that make it better or worse, and I think that's what causes people to be able to, I guess, kind of deal with those sensitivities in a better way, or an easier way, I should
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to spirits.
Well, and I think that having access to nature, being able to ground ourselves, I mean, the whole thing about being able to ground ourselves is like literally, if you think about the way that a ground wire works and just how with electricity, if electricity is grounded, then it doesn't short circuit. And
Mhm.
if electricity is not grounded, it just does all kinds of cuckoo things. It can set
Mhm.
fires, it can short circuit, it can glitch out, all of this other stuff. And human bodies are electrical instruments. Like we are made of energy. We appear to have matter, but we know that atoms are just like fast moving everything, that ultimately all of it comes down to frequency and energy. And you're right. Like the way that we are raising this generation of kids in front of tablets, in front of screens, and not
Mhm.
sending them outside, it does not support us as an organism. And I really, over the summer, I channeled a book over the course of 1 week. It's got a lot of work to do between now and when it gets published. But my guides, my council of we came through and they gave me like all this information. And one of the things they just kept saying over and over and over again was, you are, or they kept saying, we as the human race, speaking about the species, us as a species, we are cells in the body of this earth. And really, everything is a cell in the body of the earth.
Yeah.
And if you think about yourself as a cell in the body of the earth, when we start siloing ourselves, when we start compartmentalizing ourselves, when we start insulating ourselves from just being outside and being in nature and touching the trees and touching the ground, I think that we start becoming these like rogue cells. And left, like, it's almost like when something is left to its own devices and doesn't have sort of the order of the universe to entrain with, then
Hmm.
wacky, crazy things start to happen.
I was thinking about that in regards to the earth, literally. As of recently, you see things happening all over the world that they can't explain. They're like, wow, there's just this explosion in the middle of the desert. And nobody knows where it came from, and it just looks like a volcano erupted.
Hmm.
And or there's like water spouts, and there's sinkholes and all these things. And I'm like, okay, the earth is literally no different than a person or
Yes,
anything else. So of course, but I've seen it more now than ever before. It's happening at a very fast rate. Um so yeah, if we're putting more bad in than good, creating an imbalance. If you think of the earth like your stomach or something, if all you eat is junk food all day, you're going to get sick. So,
exactly.
you
Exactly.
know,
Well, and if we start thinking of ourselves as part of the earth and really
mhm.
interconnected, one of the things I've noticed is that there's so much dialogue. And, even within sort of the woo world and the spiritual community, I hear so much like almost like sinner kind of mentality, perspective of ourselves, of like we are the lowly, horrible creatures that are causing the demise of the earth. And recently I've just been really feeling like, well, what if we are part of her, or we are part of her, and what if like our journey is part of her evolution, like that like as we are part of her and we are consciousness here as this, like she's working through this as well. It's not
Mhm.
just
Oh
we are
yeah, as
these
above so below. I
as
mean,
above,
there's
so below, and that
mhm.
we are not separate from her. Like
Right.
she's got this process and this lesson and this thing that she's going through to kind of come back into integration. And they're just, I mean, I think that we've gone through this sort of the great illusion of separation for 5,000 years now, but we are starting to move back towards the understanding that we really are interconnected and we are all one. But we're kind of, I don't know, it feels to me like we're kind of in like the ship is in the process of like doing this massive pivot, massive turnaround. And in the same way that kind of like, uh buffer zone between Mercury going
Mhm.
retro, when Mercury is coming out of a retrograde or going into a retrograde. But when you've got a planet that's going retrograde, there's like that shadow period where it's still kind of challenging, even if it is turning around or making
Yeah.
that shift. Yeah.
And you make a good point, we always teach forgiving ourselves and things in our own lives, and it's the same with the planet. Yes, we we can't do anything about the past. We can start now
Hmm.
and be fully aware and change the future.
Yeah.
Um, but we do have to forgive ourselves because we didn't know before,
We
just like
didn't know before.
you don't know you're allergic to food or something until you eat it. So,
Right, right.
um,
Well, and so much of our technology and so much of the stuff that we as a species have sort of evolved into and have been able to create was in direct response to a challenge or a problem or a solution. Like, I think sometimes we look at the world through the lens of the resources and the privilege we have now, as if, like, I don't know, like we compare it as apples to apples. And so often I think that we have a new perspective. But like you were saying, it's like if you've never eaten it, you don't know what it's going to do. Like I really do think like the people who came up with like TV dinners and plastics and all of the technology from
Yeah.
the 1950s and 60s, they really thought that it was going to make life better. Like I really
Well,
I maybe there were some nefarious people involved, but I honestly think that most of the people who were involved in that technology at the time thought that they were going to make life better for human beings on this earth.
there was it was actually when I went to the Sally house in Atchison, Kansas, but there was a paper plate outside of the house, and I kept hearing you are what you eat, and what you feed you, and all this stuff. But it turns out that the man who invented paper plates was from Kansas, and it
Hmm.
was it's funny. I was saying about the men and women thing, but it was during the war, and all the in that specific area, a lot of the women were sent off to be, to help to be nurses and all kinds of stuff. So that particular area where he was from had less women, and the men were left behind, and they didn't want to do dishes. So they thought it would be easier. Yes. See, this is what I'm talking.
Oh my God.
And quicker, so they could all get back to work faster, but it was also the women that were there, um because in other places, he's like, well, it solves that problem too, because in the towns where across the US where men were drafted, and the women also had to go to work in the factories and stuff to
Right.
keep everything running. He said, well, they'll do less dishes. They don't want to get home from work and have to do dishes also. So yes, I mean, they legitimately thought it was creating less stress, in their lives at the time. And
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and at the time, it probably did create less stress. And, that's the whole thing too about like quantity. It's sort of
oh my
like,
goodness.
just even like sugar and like soda.
Yeah.
I think about when I was a small child, if you got to have like an 8-ounce glass of Coca-Cola, that was a special treat. Like,
Oh
that was
yeah.
something that you got it on rare occasion, and it was a really
Yep.
special treat. Like, I remember when it was like being able to eat candy was something that you could do, like, at least in my household, it was like either you were visiting some auntie or grandma who had the
Oh yeah, my
bowl of
grandma, she got that.
hideous hard ribbon candy.
Yep.
That's awful
Or those
stuff.
butterscotch,
Oh my god, yeah. Yeah, that tasted so bad, and I mean, I don't know, the grandmothers with the ribbon candy, it's like it's pretty, but it tastes so bad, it's like you can be sure your grandchildren are not gonna eat a whole lot of it. But, back then, it was people were using or consuming these things in moderation and as a special treat. And then, we had the farm subsidies that happened with corn, and corn syrup went from being, we developed high fructose corn syrup, and corn
oh,
syrup
it's
went
so
from
bad for
being,
you.
it's so bad for you. And it went from being like this thing that was fairly unusual and inaccessible to being ubiquitous. And then all of a sudden, with the farm subsidies, we have these massive amounts of corn syrup. And so then as a result, it's like, well, now we have to make more soda. And now we have to convince people that it's okay to eat Kit Kat, eat a Kit Kat bar in the afternoon every single day and all of these other things. And so I think that it's like, in some cases, it's like, yeah, paper plates, not necessarily a problem if used on a sort of on a needed basis, but not, but then it's like as humans, we just like take these ideas and then we just
Oh my gosh. And
and
yeah,
blow them up.
and it really, I was with I took my daughter to the zoo a week or two ago, and they have in and I'm like, we really need to display things. All these ad signs that says for lease needs, I'm like, while they're waiting for somebody to lease that, why don't they put up almost like um brochure style, info gram type things that tell, because that really made, I was like, wow, it takes 700, one tree makes 700 paper bags. Well, one cashier probably goes through that in a day, or
Mm-hmm.
probably less than a day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's when you think you're doing something good by using paper. Imagine the plastic,
Right.
And then it
Right.
talked about, it showed how many years it takes styrofoam and plastic and glass. Glass, obviously, never, ever. Um, well, I think it takes like a million years or something. I don't know what the rate of is for, um, but styrofoam obviously takes a very long time.
Very long
Um,
time.
and plastic, there's so many. Plastic doesn't take, it takes like 400 years for but the chemicals in the
Mm-hmm.
plastic are just as bad for us, much less the earth. So,
Yeah.
so, but all of those things, I'm like, wow, wow. And we always, I'm an artist, so I use things like, people are like, I don't know what I use things for multiple, it's like in multiple series of things. So,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, if I grow flowers. So not only am I getting the joy of growing them, and then if I pick them to or photograph them because I'm a photographer, and then once I do that, I put them on, in a vase to enjoy, which boosts the mood in my home, and thank them for that. And then I usually end up painting them
Mm-hmm.
or drawing them, whether it be via watercolor, acrylics or something, and then I dry them and make
Mm-hmm.
them into a different part of art. And then after they're dried, I make my own paper and I put them in that. So I'm like, because all these things I go out and I'm like, why am I buying this? Why don't, like, use what you have? Use
Use
what
what
you
you have.
have. And that has to do, I was thinking they were talking about moving to Mars and stuff today, and I'm like, why, instead of just destroying, you see all these buildings abandoned,
Mm. Mm.
and
Mm.
they're still building new ones, and I'm like, that one has a perfectly good foundation. Why don't you use that? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
use what you have. We can use this earth. We can still save this earth instead of going to a different one, because the same thing is going to happen there.
Well, and it's there's a term called taking a geographic cure. And and I just think about it's like you cannot move to a new location. It's sort of like if somebody is a raging alcoholic and
Hmm.
they decide that like living in like living in Boston and going to the Irish bars is causing the problems. They're like, well,
Right.
I'm just going to I'm going to move to California because it will be safer to be in California. And it's kind of
Right.
like, yeah. And then you're going to find bars in California where you can do the same thing,
Yep.
and it's sort of, or like even the whole thing of people who decide that their marriage is flagging. And so they're like, let's have a kid and save the marriage. It's like, no, the problem is not the problem. We need to deal with the problem, not go to Mars because,
Yeah.
so absolutely. It's like even the whole thing of America, and that's the thing that's fascinating about America is that America was built on resentment.
Hmm.
America is a place that basically we are the descendants of people who could not get along with people in their own homeland.
Yeah.
Like we're the ones who made the decision to, for one thing, to be like, they're causing me the problem, therefore I'm going to leave it. And certainly in some cases the opportunity for a better life certainly was the reason to move to America. But I think especially the early Puritans and the early settlers, they're here because they didn't agree with other people. And I think that is kind of a phenomenon that we have especially as Americans, is this idea that we can just stop, like that, just somehow like we can just be like, okay, I'm going to get away from this. And that we have a very, like, there's a way in which we have such a reactive nature as a
Oh,
culture.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's like, and you're absolutely right, because most people, well, in families, and most people's families treat each other worse than than anyone else. I mean, and there's so many aspects to that. I get that. But in neighbors, it's the same thing. Coworkers, all the people you're surrounded with. And people don't realize I mean, I again, ask me how I know. I'm not criticizing people. I've been there. Like, I know that. I still do it sometimes. But it took me so long to realize that, as it does most people. I mean, you hear it all the time, but to actually comprehend the statement of somebody's projecting their own feelings or insecurities or whatever onto their closest surroundings is
Mhm.
100% correct. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
all of the time, and that's why we can't get along with people near us,
Right.
because we haven't done our own work yet. We can't get along with ourselves in that area. So
Exactly. Exactly.
in um it took me over 40 years to realize, after high school, I had moved halfway across the country, and then I'd come back to Kansas. Then I'd move halfway across the country and come back to Kansas. And I kept doing this, thinking that, I'll just, and I'm like, okay, this is like, why do I keep coming? Okay, well, my family lives here. But also, I'm like, it's not the place. It's
Mm-mm.
because the same thing happens halfway across the country, because I was running from things that I hadn't dealt with yet. So
Right. Right.
um and and then and in Kansas it's very different, because a lot of people don't leave here.
Mm.
I've known people that are in their 90s and haven't been further than a 30-mile radius, which is
Yeah.
great. But then that also creates, for people coming in, and increasingly judgmental
Yeah.
environment, because if you've never been out of your own little, bubble, then you don't know that other things exist. So
Exactly. Well, and here in Maine, it's people who like there's a very clear boundary about like if you were not born here, you're not a Mainer. Like I'm a masshole. That's what they call people like me because I'm from Massachusetts and they literally call us massholes in the
oh,
state
that's
of
funny.
Maine. And and I will say that it is in some cases it is a very well deserved moniker, like there but it's sort of there is that quality of certain places where it's like there's the us and them mentality and that attitude of like, we're set in our ways, we have this perspective. And I mean, this is a whole other like tangent you and I could go down about just that sort of the dance between being grounded in our heritage, being grounded in our land, being grounded in our home, really understanding our place in the family of things and where we fit in all of it.
I was
But
a redhead, so I was screwed from the beginning. I never
yeah,
liked that.
yeah.
I never fit anywhere.
Well, and sensory processing stuff and, all of and being, chimera and all of this fun stuff that you've been dealing with, I'm sure. Kansas would not have been an easy place to be a very unusual child. Yeah, I mean, it was hard enough being an unusual child in Massachusetts and, where I think it's a lot more I don't know if progressive is the right word, but seems like it's a place where there's definitely like room for weirdness.
Yeah, I have family in Massachusetts, but like when I lived in New York, of course, if you I wasn't even born and raised in Kansas. I had just moved everywhere. I moved as an adult from Kansas. So of
Mhm.
course, you get the whole "you're not in Kansas anymore, Toto," and eh, like, shoot, I got that when I lived in Japan. People, I'm like, okay, okay, everybody's seen The Wizard of Oz.
Mhm,
I get it.
mhm. Yeah, you get it.
But
Yeah,
um, but it's true. Yeah, yeah. The Northeast is very I would say anywhere on the east, actually,
yeah.
is, I lived in the south, and it's the same way as the northern part. You go
Mhm.
west, I lived in Colorado, and they're much more. Utah's its own state, but any other state that direction is pretty accepting of just about anything, which makes sense because historically obviously they had ships coming in as well with immigrants for a very long time, and those were from very different countries than the Europeans, side. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
but it's I think again for the neurodiverse community and stuff, we see things so differently. So it's very frustrating we're like, why can't people get that we're all every, everything. And I get it. I get both sides, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you know, I really believe I was having a conversation earlier today about the fact that so many more people are, there's so much more neurodiversity. There are so many more people waking up to being empaths. There's so many more people who are just perceiving things in a different way. And I really believe that part of why there's just more and more of us like this is because we are the canaries in the coal mine, but we're also the ones who are like, I think we're getting to a point of critical mass where there will be basically that ability to say, like, no mas, like, no
mhm.
more, yet this is not working, peeps.
Yeah.
And as we more and more of us have that capacity for extrasensory perception, as more and more of us has the capacity to feel emotions that are, and distress and other things, it's going to get to a point where it's like, even though I'm not the person experiencing this, because that other person is experiencing this, or because that tree is experiencing this, or that animal is experiencing this, or that river is experiencing this is not okay. This is not acceptable. I think the challenge right now is that there is a growing number of us who are feeling this, but there is also a level of, for lack of a better word, impotence, in the sense that we have not quite hit critical mass. And so I think a lot of times we can feel remarkably helpless, powerless, and guilty because we see there's a problem that needs to be attended to, but we can't really, like, there's only so much we're capable of doing. I actually
Well, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I have this memory that's kind of, I had a friend who could communicate with animals. She was one of the
Mhm.
best animal communicators. She still can, but one of the best animal communicators I've known, and animals would talk to her. And so she happened to be at a pet store on Newbury Street in Boston many, many, many years ago, and there was this gorgeous hyacinth macaw that was like was there, and she walked into the pet store for whatever reason, and the hyacinth macaw just started talking to her. And
Mhm.
the macaw was like, and even like squawking at her and talking. And the macaw was like, take me out of here. Take me out of here. I hate this place. I hate
Oh
this.
my
I'm
gosh, I can't
miserable.
go. Yeah, I can't go to pet stores.
Yeah, I know. No, not at all. Can't do that. Not at all. But so she's like hearing this macaw, and all she could do was just stand there and say back to him, I am so sorry, but there is nothing. I hear you. I know that you're miserable. I know you don't like being here and that you're really, really, really unhappy. And there is nothing I can do to save you. And I think that that is one of the most agonizing places for us to be in as
Yeah,
empaths, especially when we are feeling the labor pains of this new awakening as a species.
yeah.
It's messy. And the thing is, we don't always make it through birth. It's, more and more of us do now, but we as a species have, and not just as a human species, but any mammal that gives birth, there's like legacy of ancestral memory of how perilous and precarious it is to give birth. And in a lot of ways, I think the whole planet is in this evolutionary stage, but we're definitely in the awkward in between stage.
Um, I know. I was gonna say that I don't think there's more of us necessarily, because I think that Topeka was considered the psychiatric capital of the world, and we had this big, there were psychiatric orphanages. there was a state hospital, and then we also had the very infamous Meningers Hospital, which also has a branch in Massachusetts. There were horrible, horrible, horrible things done there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that there's necessarily more of us now. I think that it's just more acceptable to um have, we're accepting mental illness, we're accepting neurodiversity, we're accepting behavioral challenges, all of that, obviously more so because I even had kind of, setbacks from talking about any type of even, and I came from Roswell. Like I had from talking about experiences with UFOs, from talking about anything mental health wise or depression or even because that can also, we talked about that before, that can be generational, it can be past life. Because my most recent past life, I was in an institution that was burning down. So of
Oh.
course, I'm going to be, and I remember the part of the life where I got there and I was like accepting of it, and then the building, and I'm completely helpless. Like I
Mm.
was like strapped to some bed or something. And so, yes, I think in a lot of, especially, in the older generations, there's still, whether it was diagnosed or not, or whether they would even talk about it. This was back when, even in, I think about in my parents, my mom's in her 70s, and in her era, no way would you tell somebody that you were depressed. Shoot, they sent women to the psych ward because they didn't want to clean house,
Right. Right.
so
Right.
much less anything else. So
Or she wasn't willing to have sex with her husband,
exactly,
like
yeah. And
all
that's,
kinds of reasons.
oh yeah, and that was their excuse to get rid of their first wife that they didn't like, to go remarry. And
Right.
so horrible. And being a medium and empathic here, and they found there's thousands of unmarked graves under this city, and these
Mm.
people were tortured. And so I see that that's that guilt that comes forward with me. There's
Yeah.
nothing I can do about that. But it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible to
Yeah.
know that, especially as I understand more of even autism and stuff with myself. And I used to work with adults with developmental disabilities, and they were the greatest people I learned so much. Um, and to think that we just killed just recklessly, um, and people turn their heads to it,
Right.
you know.
Right. Right.
Um, Geniuses, and I even know people still that are absolute such beautiful people that are kind of still stuck in that trauma of not being accepted, and not however they grew up, and however, because they're different. And
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Well, and I think, I mean, I do believe there are people who have a capacity to function in the ordinary world and who are not as sensitive as some of us are, because I've had enough conversations with people who do not have who are not who are basically neurotypical,
mhm,
that I do know that there are those of us who are different, and then there are the people who just have a very different experience of who experience the world in this very compartmentalized way. And I do think that one thing about that is that it is much easier to see the world with blinders on,
yes.
and to not be like, I was actually having a conversation my friend Katie Gall on a podcast that aired a couple of weeks ago on the Empathic Mastery Show about ADHD and empaths, and how there's a real intersection between, these two. I mean, empath is not a
Mhm,
diagnosis or a pathology. It's just,
right.
it's a science fiction term. But, that there's definitely this really interesting intersection between ADHD and empaths. And Katie was talking about one of the things that she had learned was that there's a theory that ADHD was sort of an evolutionary boon, and that because the thing is that when it came to hunter gatherer society, that the people with the capacity to sort of see multiple things all at once were the ones who could like look across the horizon and see the berries and see the herd of buffalo that were sort of walking across the top of the ridge, or any number of different things. And that the average neurotypical person is kind of going from one thing to the next thing, but not necessarily noticing all the things the way those of us who are more neurodiverse do, and or neurodivergent do. And I had this, I don't think I told you this in our last thing. I had this experience where I personally really got like that I was different. I was visiting, I was doing like sort of, like a hanging out and doing an overnight at a friend's house when I was like 18 and a half years old. And we were partaking of some, of some substances. So we were in a slightly altered state, psychedelic kind of state. And it was sort of the end of the night, and they had put on Gamera, like, versus Godzilla on the television set. And I was in the room, and there was my friend and her boyfriend and maybe some other person and me. And I was watching them watch the television, and they were like completely focused on nothing but the TV. They were like, that's all they were seeing. They were like focused on Gamera and Godzilla and the Japanese movie and how funny it was, and like the really artificial dubbing
Huh.
and all of that. Like that's what they were doing. I was aware of the TV program. I was aware of the fish tank that was bubbling and making sound, and the electricity that was coming, the
Yeah.
sound of electricity from the fish tank. I was aware of the sound of the electricity and the hum from the television. I was aware of the lights that were flickering over my head. I was aware of the other human beings, their bodies,
Mhm.
that they were breathing, that they were experiencing these things. I was aware of my own experience sitting in the seat that I was in, and the way that the floor was just like a little bit warped, like it was not a level floor. I was aware of everything in that room
Mhm.
while they were just aware of that TV show. And for me, I was like 18 and a half, and that was the moment where I was like, oh, I experienced the world completely differently than these people experience the world. And I'm seeing all these things that they're just not even aware of. So I guess I would wonder, even in the case of some of these folks that, like they can just sort of look the other way, is it that they can look the other way, or are they really so kind of siloed and compartmentalized that they really can simply just be oblivious?
Uh, I think both.
Yeah.
I think also it has to do with not so many people aren't present.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
and that's due to, your chakras and lacking of grounding and everything else, So, and I love and hate that everything's done for us. I
Mm.
was thinking when I was helping my son with a science project, I'm like, man, you all can just like pull a picture up. He had to make a poster board, for it and have these. And I was like, you can just pull this up on the internet, print it off, glue it on there, whatever. I was like, shoot, that would have taken me. I would have had to search through 75 Better Homes magazines and like use a dictionary that nobody's ever heard of nowadays because we've got Siri and to like write down or type it out on the old school typewriter,
Right.
your tink to tink tink tink, and use the whiteout, which
Yes. Yes.
like all these things are done and it's not our kids' fault because that's the generations they've grown up in. So that's all they know. But I'm like, everything is done for us. The same as I came home one night and it was like dusk and the power went out in my entire like huge parts of the neighborhood, and everybody's outside panicking on their phones calling the power company, and I was like, whatever, it'll come back on when it comes on, because like I have candles and I know where I grew up on top of a mountain. That was my favorite time when the power went out. That meant my parents were going to play board games with us, and we could sit around the,
Mhm.
wood burning stove. Like, but it doesn't. It's not something that made me. Which I get why it does make people panic, but it didn't make me panic. I'm like, oh, what if the phone? No, I don't care if the phone dies. I don't like. We didn't have phones everywhere back then.
We didn't. I mean, I was born in the analog age, and I was a young adult when we started to really move into, and actually I was, I was an adult when we really started to move into the digital age. And it is really like the immediacy that things come. And actually that sort of leads me back to something we were talking about with like people being high, the percentage of diversity and the percentage of like people who are neurodiverse and other. And you were saying that you think that it's not necessarily an increase of number. What I would actually argue is that I think that it's a rain barrel effect in the sense that everything is coming at us at such a rapid pace, and there
Mhm.
is so much more information that we are processing, that where many people were able to sort of pass or were able to basically kind of function because there was less strain on the system.
Oh
Now the
yeah,
systems are getting maxed out and people are spinning out or just not able to control the sensitivity or the neurodiversity in the way that maybe when the world was just simpler, we could.
yeah,
But it's like
yeah.
the increase of, I mean, it's amazing when I think about like exactly what you were talking about. Like if you were going to write a paper when I was a child, like you had to like get the encyclopedia, you had to go to the library and like
Yeah.
look stuff up. And if it
The
was an
card
old
catalog.
article, card catalog. And then if you were looking for an old article in a newspaper, you would often have to go and get microfiche
Oh
and
yeah.
like get this weird thing printed up. And then there was no scanners, there was no like ability to like just grab a piece of text and put it into a document. Everything had to be either handwritten or typed,
Yeah.
and you were I mean, so what now takes a half hour to write as a research paper took weeks to do back
Oh
in the
yeah.
day. Yeah.
I mean, I had a callus. I still do because I still write a lot, but I really didn't, on you have that right from a pencil because
Yes,
we can
yes.
use pens. Um, and it's just, the same with like if you wanted to communicate with someone that you couldn't call because they're long distance and it was expensive, you had to write them a letter and you had to wait
Mhm.
for that letter. So it required patience and everything. So I was thinking about this very thing on my way to work this morning because um I don't have my phone on in the car and I was listening to regular radio. I know, gasp, like that's what keeps us all. But kids nowadays, my kids get in the car and they automatically want their playlist. So
Mhm.
I think things like that have disconnected us from even people who are highly intuitive might not know it or use it. They might know it but not use it as much because of things like that. Because I get messages from guides and spirits and everything else even through the radio.
Mhm.
If I had a
Absolutely.
yeah, if I had a pre-planned playlist,
Yeah, you
they
wouldn't be
couldn't do
getting
that.
that information.
No,
We
and I
had
would know what's coming next. It wouldn't be it would be predictable.
we had an amazing, so back when I first opened up my tattoo studio a long, long time ago, because I don't even do that anymore, but like we had 100 disc CD player that like had like that was on rotation. And at the time when it was just me and my original business partner, the one who hated computers, we each had 50 CDs in. It was absolutely amazing how frequently the conversation that we were having would then be played as a song. Like that there would be
Yeah.
something we were doing or something we were saying or some kind of piece that was going on, and the music would just like come on and the next thing would be absolutely reflecting exactly what it was that we were thinking about. And this was not even a digital, like this was an analog, like mechanical CD player that just moved, like that just
Oh yeah.
shifted through things. It wasn't like there was Siri listening or
Yep.
anything. It was amazing how frequently, though, the music was exactly what we needed, like related to the thing.
And that happens to me when I walk in, even like Walmart or a grocery
Yeah.
store or something. And I'm like, okay, because I think about this all the time. I'm like, I I bet this would resonate with multiple people in different ways at this point in their life, whatever song's on or whatever. But I'm like, it's a tragedy if I'm the only one that's paying attention.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
You know what
Mhm.
I mean? Like,
Yeah,
that is so sad.
that is
That's
really sad. Well, and then also just people, how frequently people chalk it up to, "Oh, it's just a coincidence.
yeah,
It's
oh, that's
just
just
oh, no, yeah, whatever." And it's
yeah.
like, "No, this is a message from the
Yes.
universe specifically for you about
Yeah.
something that you were thinking about that you needed an answer for, and boom, here's your answer."
And even if it resonates with multiple people, well, yes, of course, there's more. But I always say, you are always in exactly the right place at exactly the right time where you were meant to be, good or bad. And
Right.
so there's a reason you clicked on my, if you were in New Orleans driving home, whatever, and you turn the radio station here, there's a reason that this came on. My TV will come on in the middle. I don't even watch TV hardly, but it'll come on in the middle of the night and show me something that I need to know. And I
Mhm.
better pay attention because
Mhm.
sometimes it's something serious. Like one
Yeah.
time, I lived in a different neighborhood and it was pretty bad. And my TV would come on in the middle of the night and it would be like cops on, like the show Cops, and then it'd
Mhm.
be
Mhm.
like it would flicker and switch to something else and be like somebody, show an investigation team or something. Um, and then there would be like the next day somebody's house got broken. It was, something. And I'm like, wow, I should really, pay attention to that.
Mm.
That happens in the middle of the night. So,
I get communication a lot through license plates,
yep.
and that's been something, and one of the
Hmm.
freakiest ones that I ever experienced was many, many years ago. My friend and I were driving, we were on a long drive down to a part of Massachusetts called P Town, which is like at the very, very edge of Cape Cod. And we had like a couple-hour drive going down and going back, and we were talking. At the time, I was like kind of on a rant about patriarchy and, Yahweh, and just like the whole kind of thing. And I was kind of like, I was in a mood. And I was talking, and I was sort of like just basically saying like, you really did a number on us, dude." And as we are driving, just as I finish saying this car comes in front of me, and the license plate is for Zion.
Yep.
And I was like, and I was like, it was sort of like, "Look, you little bug, I'm not going to crush you right now, but just
Oh
letting
yeah.
you know, I'm listening to you. Like
Yep.
I heard you. I hear you." It was uncanny how
I will.
relevant it was.
There's been, and I swear they change right in front of me, because um also in situations to help me, not just, to warn me about to warn me a
Yeah.
lot. But
Yeah.
um the other day, my daughter and I knew that I shouldn't have gone to that specific store, and then there was a long line, and then it took us a long time. I hadn't eaten in a while. I'm hypoglycemic, and I started getting very, like, I was probably about to pass out, and my daughter had like some applesauce or something. She's like, Mom, you need to. When we got to the car, like, that's almost too late.
Mhm.
Driving out of the parking lot, there was a car that had a license plate that said Trisha. I'm like, well, that's like, if that doesn't. So, and then what was the other one? It was like, it said there's one that said sugar baby. I'm like, yeah, universe, it's got jokes. And what was it? And I take pictures of these sometimes because for the longest time, I mean, obviously not while I'm driving, but like those were parked cars. So,
Mhm.
um, but for the longest time, over the years, and they still kind of ignore it a lot and just think I'm crazy, which is fine. I get it. I probably would have too 10 years ago, but I would take pictures of things to prove to my family, that but these things used to happen to my mom all the time, and sometimes it's like an overload to her. She's like, I can't, your world, I can't, I've got to go. Same thing. We were talking about something nostalgic from New Mexico, and she was talking about the year I was born, and all of a sudden this car comes where we were parked, and parallel parks in front of us, and it had a New Mexico plate that said 1981, which is
Oh
the year
my
I was
goodness.
born. And she's like, I'm done. I'm done. "Yeah."
It's fascinating to me. We just actually, it's funny. We just watched the movie Nope the other day. Jordan Peele's newest movie, which is quite delightful and is all about extraterrestrials. Um, but kind of that whole thing of like when you just are like, yep, nope, like not going there. Like that is literally what the name of the movie is, like, nope, I'm
Yeah.
not doing that. And I just think it's so fascinating to me how there are those of us like you and I who like lean into it and are curious about it and fascinated by it and are like, I have to know more. And then there are people like your mom and just I mean, my mom was so in the nope that she had just kind of like, she's like, this does not, like, my mother's very sensitive, but she just kind of like shut all of that stuff down, like just like not even acknowledging it, no validation of it, no recognition of it, kind of like, yeah, whatever,
Hmm.
like that's a coincidence. Nope. And I just find it fascinating. Like, why is it that there are some of us like you and I who are like, yes. And then there are these other people who are just like, nope, not going there.
Well, like I said, in the beginning, I was very religious, and I was the same way.
Hmm.
But that didn't stop it from happening. It got it got even stronger
Yeah.
to where literal billboards, I remember that so vividly. I used to sell cars, and I was on a test drive, and I'm like, nope, no, all these things that were happening that were literally trying to slap me in the face, because I would channel all the time and not know how to shut it off or change it or anything. And all these things would happen that probably normal people would have to be on some sort of, hallucinogen or something that was just happening to me all the time,
Yeah.
and that was after my last near death experiences. So I couldn't shut it off. And
Mm-mm.
I was in this car with on a test drive with a couple. We had a language barrier anyways, but I couldn't concentrate on that because there was a billboard that literally said like, "Trisha, do you know?" And I'm like, "What was that?" Like, and so that was the first time. Um, and I'm like, I really am crazy. I've lost it. Nope. Nope. I've
Nope.
lost my mind.
Yeah.
And then it started happening, like friends would go on road trips and stuff with me. And it happened when I'm like, wait, you can see that too.
Yeah.
They're like, what is They're like, why does this only happen when we're around you? And I'm like, oh no, that's not what I'm worried about. I'm happier that you can see it too.
Yeah.
But then they're like, it's like another world going, anywhere with you because these things. I'm like, I'm like, not really. It happens all the time. In your world, you just don't
You're
notice
just
it.
not noticing it because you're watching
Right.
Gamera and Godzilla, and you're not aware of all the other things that are going on in the world around you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was at a concert, which this was actually pretty terrifying. Um, and it was in Kansas City. It was a few years ago actually. And my friend that I went to the restroom or whatever. I'm staying there, and they started this DJ came on stage between bands and started playing music, and they had all these lights and stuff. Everybody, I swear to you, this was the craziest thing. Everybody stops. Everyone in there stops and is just staring, like blank stare, not blinking, not moving, nothing, at these screens that have random um, sound frequencies and lights and everything. But this was before I knew anything about any of that. and they're just like zombies, like,
Mhm.
and I'm like,
Mhm.
so it was me, and I look around, and there's one other girl looking around, one in this entire huge crowd looking around at everybody like confused. And I literally went up to somebody. I'm like, I'm like, are you okay? Is it, and me and her, like, she sees me across because we're the only ones moving. And I put my arm, I'm like, and my friend walks up behind me and he's like, whoa, this is what I'm like, I'm like, do you see what is wrong with all these people? And then the DJ stops and everybody goes back to normal. Like, don't eat. I'm
Wow.
like, oh,
Wow.
wow. That's scary. That's,
That is scary. I mean, I remember when one of my nephews was, I don't know, like 8, 9 years old, and he was, sorry, I just got a text message that I from the spouse who is like, "Are you almost done?" I'm like, "I'm just going to say not yet." He was my nephew was like a kid, and I just remember I was trying the television, somebody had turned the TV on, and he just like it was like he just like entrained with the television set,
mhm,
and there was no getting through to him. Like, I'm like talking to him and he's not even hearing me. And
yeah,
I saw that zombie, like it was one of the first times where I saw it so clearly. And it's so fascinating how easily we can entrain to certain things. We can get sucked into those things. So yeah, I had the experience many years ago. I was attending a lecture that Robert Anton Wilson was doing, who wrote like Schrodinger's Cat and the Illuminati trilogy. He was kind of like this
oh,
guy,
yeah,
wrote some really interesting stuff, but he was very aware of kind of hypnotic suggestion and stuff. And so
mhm,
he did this thing where he basically did a hypnotic induction in the middle of his lecture with his entire audience. And I remember going, like, him starting this thing, talking about something, and then I remember waking up on the other side of this induction where he was like, "Ha ha, I just did this thing to you guys."
yeah,
And it's I mean, I think as human beings, we like to think of ourselves as having a lot of autonomy and a lot of free will, but I think we
mm,
are often a lot more vulnerable than we necessarily want to acknowledge.
yeah.
Yeah.
When I kept getting a message to get my hypnotherapy certification. Um, it was it was a year after I had a terrible experience with a UFO that I talked about on the Outer Limits. Gosh, like a month ago. But one of the time, like, there was this entire ship over Manhattan, and um, but I was in traffic, and they blocked off the highways. And all of a sudden, I see these lights above us, and my kids, every time they would flash these lights, uh, they could be in the middle of a conversation. And I'm
Mm,
like, and I would see the people in the cars next to me, the same thing happen. And, and of course, there's theories and folklore about that it doesn't, like, witches can't be hypnotized, all this other stuff. Well, so I'm like, what is happening? And then they would come to and wouldn't remember anything
right.
that happened or have a different memory of where we were going or what we were doing. And I'm like, and with kids, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to argue this
Yeah.
or tell them different or anything. But um, it was interesting to me because it's the same thing with lights in our present world as well. They start changing all the street lights to purple or different colors. They start headlights if you're sensitive
Mm,
to that. And
yes.
so there's been studies now of people who've had car accidents and gone off the road all of a sudden, or like train conductors. and it's the same theory as people who have accidents in certain tunnels and in certain weather and stuff, because it 100%, as far as science goes, is a form of hypnosis. And it's
Mhm.
dangerous when
Mhm.
you start playing with, of course, color. We're just like and it's the same with animals, deer in the headlight.
Mhm.
Okay, you think of UFO, what do? Shine a light on exactly. What? Somebody's gonna freeze, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so all of the I'm like, that's really we aren't in a free in a free world at all. We're completely manipulated all the time, and but it's equally healing to accept that, because I can't control that. I can't.
Well, and while yes, there are things, there's media and there's things that are being that where we're being manipulated. But then the other side of it is when you know that the message is coming through from a divine channel, from something higher than ourselves.
Oh yeah.
I just take such comfort in that of like, like the world is so much bigger than is dreamt of in our human philosophy, and our ego is capable of imagining. And it's like, even if the DJ is hypnotizing a room, an entire concert of people, or and the UFO is like impacting all of these people, there is a power that is even greater than that, that's watching over all of it. I sincerely believe, and that I take a great deal of comfort in.
Well, and that's what happened. It's kind of like you were saying, at some point we just have to say no mas. That's
No
enough.
mas.
Well, the same thing happened to me after a lot of experiences and stuff, which were done by humans,
Mhm.
um, the, the mill labs and everything else, or being used for remote viewing, or whatever. Something else, something bigger, started helping me, started saving me. It's like they said, no more, no
No
more."
more. Well, and I was, the conversation that I was having with my friend Allison, who is, this show's going to air a ways out, but we recorded it the other day, and we were talking about when she because she had, like, there were these ETs that had been sort of like around her family for a very long time. And when she basically like said, "Look, I can't deal with this anymore. You got to cut it out."
Yeah.
They were like, "Oh, sorry. Okay, we'll leave you alone now." And I do think that one of the things that is important for us to realize is that we have agency with our boundaries, even with things that are larger or greater than ourselves, and that we do get to say no mas. We do get to say, this is not comfortable for me. I say no. And
Mm.
I think about, kind of like vampire mythology before they totally started breaking the canon all over the place. Like vampires that can walk around in the day. Hello. We've been watching the originals, and it's like they can drink, they can eat, they can walk in the daylight. I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Um, but the old mythology of like the vampire cannot enter into the space unless they are invited, unless they have been allowed in. And I
Well,
think that
nobody
that's
can.
nobody can, and I think that's the thing we need to remember, is that we both have the ability to say we have the ability to revoke the invitation. We can take it back and say, "No, no mas. I'm not comfortable with this. This is not working for me anymore. No, no, not working."
And I think a lot of that, and a lot of my journey and coming back to Kansas all these times has 100% had to do with that, because it's like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain. It was all like he wasn't powerful. She always had the ability to change her reality.
Exactly, exactly. Well,
And
and what's so fascinating, talking about, symbols and information. I'm finding it so fascinating that we're having this whole Wizard of Oz sort of sub theme going on, because for me, Wizard of Oz has always been an indication that something really interesting is coming next. And it was
mm,
always an indication for me that wherever I am, I'm on the verge of like an ascension or an up level or of a new like initiatory transformational experience. So I find it very fascinating that we're talking, it's so meta in the sense
Hmm.
that we're talking about messages coming, and you keep on referring to Wizard of Oz aspects because for me, you know, G Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore, and Pay No Attention to the Man Behind the Curtain are two things that are very much the universe. Like it's kind of like an in joke between me and the universe whenever there's Wizard of Oz commentary. So I'm like, okay, I'm paying attention. You guys are like giving me some information here. I'm listening. I'm paying attention.
Well, and there's so that movie has been redone. I don't know if you've seen the different versions of it.
I've seen a number of
Um,
them. Yeah.
yeah. So the funny thing, when it was right before my not my last heart attack, but one before that, um, in Manhattan, and I was still drinking. I was still, doing things. Living a lot life like I shouldn't, eating tons of sugar. And I mean, I
Mhm.
never did like illegal things, but I'm talking about like stuff that I knew was bad for me. Going
Yeah.
back to toxic people, stuff like that, toxic jobs, toxic. And I went to see a drag show, which was great. This has nothing to do with their performance or anything, but the name of it was Dirty Dorothy. And and it was like a week later maybe that I had a heart attack. you know, and then come around to this year, last spring actually, I went to a play performed by my niece's school, and it was I was like, it was so touching, and so to everybody there, I was like, man, this is like it's like they're professionals on Broadway. These kids had so much energy into it and stuff. And it was like such an innocence, and I'm like, that's like comparing the Dirty Dorothy me to where I've come now,
Mm,
is
mm.
such a cycle that was the crazy that when you start thinking, because initially back then when I had that heart attack, I'm like, well, this is the Tin Man here. Like,
Mm, mm.
I need a heart, like literally and figuratively back then. Um, and so many things. And I think I went through the phases of each character, when you kind of relate to something like that. And then for a while, um I was a coward, and I had this picture of a lion and that kept coming up, the cowardly. And I was like, as far as being afraid of all these things that are just
Mhm.
fears and
Mhm.
illusion. And then the scarecrow, needing your brain. Here's my guide. Like, how many times we have strike you with lightning or electrocute you or give you a heart, whatever. You're gonna like start using your brain. And so I went through all the little phases, even the Wicked Witch part probably.
Mm, mm. I have tended, as I'm listening, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I can totally see going through all the different archetypes of the Wizard of Oz." I
Yeah.
totally get that. I tend to really kind of align myself with Glinda and, and just kind of like I keep myself in kind of that, like, are you a good witch or a bad witch? Like, I just kind of stay in the
Yeah.
good witch category and really keep myself sort of in that space. Um, but I love how you were talking about, like, the Dirty Dorothy versus this beautiful, like, the evolution of our souls and the evolution of
Hmm.
ourselves and the evolution of our journey and
Yeah.
how far we can come with all of it.
I think, I think I relate to Glinda now, and I try to keep myself in that. But I've been all of those characters.
Yeah. Yeah.
We all have,
Mhm.
um, at some point.
Yeah.
Everyone has caused the storm. Everyone's been, the bad witch. Everyone's been a flying monkey. At some point in our lives, even whether that's one thing about my last near death experience is, um all the things that flashed back in my head when I died and came back. It's like I've gotten to go back and reflect on each one a different, I mean, through these last few years, and see it from a different perspective. And my guide showed me why those things happen from that person's point of view.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's tough. That's it changes it changes you as a person because it's things never considered.
Right.
Um,
It is so amazing when you have that perspective shift where you're kind of like, "Oh, I see, I get it. I see, like, they came to this in this way because of this." And I mean, so often as human beings, we form these conclusions and we cop a resentment and we are like,
mhm.
they did that because blah blah blah. And sometimes, I mean, it's just because there are no women to wash the dishes and you just got to make the paper plates. It just happens. Something you said a while back that I wanted to circle back around to was you were talking about like a witch cannot be hypnotized. And I was thinking about I have had since I was a very fairly young, I'm not enamored of glamour, like in the
Mhm.
sense of like magical glamours.
Okay.
I can see charismatic people in general. I'm kind of like, yeah, whatever. Do your like take your charisma and go someplace else because it's not going to work on me. And and I think hypnosis and charisma are like deeply interconnected. And it's fascinating to me just watching the world and seeing how, there's like these experiences like you were talking about with like the UFO and like the DJ and the screens, but
Yeah.
then also the charismatic leaders, the charismatic gurus, the charismatic
Yeah.
influencers, these rock star kind of people where it's like people are just like it's like they're so completely full of it, and yet
Mhm.
they've got people eating out of their hand
Yeah.
or spoon feeding them, like giving them everything that they want. And it's just fascinating how some of us are less able to be duped by energy that's designed to manipulate than some of the rest of us.
And I don't think that it's not I think that we're able to be hypnotized, but we realize it and come out, it's like,
Yeah.
yes, I have been fooled by numerous people in my
Yeah.
life. And that comes with the empathic part too,
Oh,
because you
yeah.
want to see the good in everybody.
Right.
We don't, and especially like autism stuff. I sometimes it's complete innocence to me. Like I can't fathom some of the things that people do. That wouldn't even cross my
Yeah, you
realm
take
of
people at face value.
right.
Right, right.
And so I think that's part of it too. Yes, I'm able to be fooled. I have been numerous times,
Mhm.
and I am able to be hypnotized. I've been that, but now, and I think that's why I was meant to go to uh, obtain my certification in hypnotherapy because I see how it works. I
Mhm,
realize it.
mhm.
I I see it happening, and can also protect myself from things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm a great hypnotic subject when I have with consent.
right,
And I think even with that whole story about Robert Anton Wilson, and it was like he basically told us what he was going to do. He did not just start hypnotizing us. He actually said, I am now going to do this thing to you guys. And
right.
pretty much people were like, oh, okay. And I just like I lost time. Like I lost a chunk of time. I think
Mhm.
pretty much the entire room lost a chunk of time. But there is a way in which I consented to it. I didn't
Mhm.
like be like, okay, he's going to hypnotize the room. I'm going to get up and leave, or I'm going to go stand at the very back of the room and kind of watch him. Like I just slid in and was experiencing that. So, yeah, I don't think that we are incapable of being hypnotized, but I do think that there is this way that we can feel when something's going against our will
Yes.
and where we can kind of sense that. But sometimes that's from having our will violated
Right.
or
I've
yeah.
struggled with that specific part a lot because every time I've been taken, or every time I've been used for remote viewing, or every time whatever happens, and I know it, like the second I come to and I know it, and I started doing stuff, excuse me, prior to, like, I didn't even realize I was doing it at first. I would take a screenshot of the time on my radio, or I would accidentally take a screenshot and find it later on my phone, and it was I would break down after, I'm like, no, no, and then all of a sudden I would remember the experience and it would come back. And whereas in other parts of my life, it took me, I didn't remember any of these things for until I was in my 30s, and
Mhm,
I would start
mhm,
remembering back to things that happened in my life. But um now I know right away, and it is that violation of, I didn't allow that, you know.
mhm. Yeah.
So, but there's to that extent there's not a lot I can do. We can do, and I think I've mentioned before that it's one of those things, we're never going to be the top of the food chain. We're never going to be, we're just as bad to frogs in biology and anthills and anything else, so um I hope they're the good farmer that doesn't want to abuse their cattle, and wants me to have a good life, even though I'm going to be eaten at the end of it. That's
Mhm.
fine. um I just accept it as that. So
Well, and that
there's
sort of leads me back to just this whole piece of I've really been feeling into what it means to be a cell in the body of this planet, and that we are gonna, like, we are just part of this earth, as the ants are, as the cows are, as the frogs are. Like, we're just a cell in the body of this earth. We are no greater, we are no smaller, we are just cells in the body of the earth, and that's really what we are.
I think one of the greatest movies ever made to this day, that I tell people I even had a whole experience with that too. We'll have to talk about stuff, you and I,
Mhm.
is The Lion King. I think I don't care if you've seen it. I want you to go back and watch it. Pay attention to the little things that are said in that. And I think that's such a good example of how we should live. The gazelle know that the lions are going to eat them, but in the end, they all have to come together to take care of their land and their, each other and everything else, not let the bad hyenas come in and overhunt and kill everything. And
Yeah.
it's and it's funny because the last time I took my kids to see that, there was there's these rock formations out west in Kansas. They're called the Badlands,
Yeah.
and then we were at that same zoo. There was this lion that it's a bronze lion statue, and I had never noticed, because I never got I was saying paying attention to the little things. I never got close enough to, I was really looking at it. I had seen it and taken pictures of it numerous times, taken pictures on it for that matter. And when I got up close, there's other animals that the artist like incorporated in the legs and everything. And I went to the front of it, and I never noticed the name of the lion was Genesis. And I'm like, that's interesting.
Wow.
And then
Wow.
they renamed the Badlands, the rock formation out west, Little Jerusalem this year,
Mm,
which is
mm.
interesting.
That
Because
is really interesting.
yeah, that means Jeru means the gift, and Salem means peace. So
Mm, mm.
I was like, well, that is. Oh my goodness, Jen, it is 10:01.
I know. It's you and I can talk. You and I could talk. Like, we
You're
could just
supposed to
talk.
talk.
We
You're
could
so
talk. We could talk.
smart.
We could
But
talk and talk and
I
talk.
uh, I assume that we weren't meant to yet, so that just means I'll have to have you back
I
again.
know, because I think we were gonna talk about EFT, but we never,
Yes.
yeah. But instead we went on a wild ride. What an amazing conversation.
I assume somebody somewhere, even if it's just one person, they could change the world one day, meant to hear something we were talking about.
Well, and I mean, it was such a setup in like kind of a divine and perfect way because like I mean, technology was acting completely wonky, which completely like it was almost like spirit just created the platform and was like, "You're going to talk about technology. You're going to talk about technology and influencers and or not influencers and well, influencers and experiencers and just like it ended up just being, I'm sure, exactly what we were supposed to talk about. So we'll have to make a plan to have a conversation about EFT another time.
Well, and talking about the electronics and stuff,
Yeah.
it probably wouldn't. I think as far as my rides, they're like, doesn't matter what you two talk about. When you're talking about something that interests you, you're putting out good energy. So
Yeah.
that in itself is
Exactly.
something. And your little,
Exactly.
I think it was a cat peeking up behind you for
Yes,
a
there
while.
is. There is. So here's
Oh,
Neo.
I couldn't see that one. I just saw
Yep,
the one
there's
behind the
Neo,
pillow.
and then Livy is behind. She's
Yes.
kind of hiding there, and then
Yeah, she kept
actually,
like when you were talking, she would like raise her hand, paw,
oh,
I guess, raise her paw, like, hey, excuse me.
hey,
Oh my
here, and then
goodness.
this is Lilu. Lilu is
Oh,
the Lilu is a brindle pug, which means that she's got some bulldog and other stuff in her. And but she
keep
is
talking. I'm here. I'm
yeah,
gonna grab something real quick though.
okay. Yeah. Lilu is we rescued her back in January of this year. So we just got her. And she is absolutely the love of my life. So
So
Lilu wanted to say hi.
this happens every time I have somebody on my show, and I painted a picture of a pug that looks, and it's like your shirt below it too. It's not finished. I'm gonna
Oh
send it.
my
I'm
goodness,
gonna
look at
send it
that.
to you.
Oh my goodness, that's so cool.
Yes,
And
yes.
it's not just your regular pug, it's got more of a brindle pug look than your average pug because usually pugs are like, the dark
Hmm.
muzzle and the eyes, and then, but she's got this very brindle face. So she's merled in the way that the image is.
Maybe that's why I didn't ever color in the white. I was like, I know I've got to lighten the eyes and stuff so you could kind of
Hmm.
see it better, but I didn't paint in, like, I left the rest of it like a brushed marbly look.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the floor is kind of like the color of your, almost,
Yeah,
when
exactly.
you're
Yeah.
holding it.
You were picking up on Lilu.
I actually started painting this September 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And I just found it like a few weeks ago and started working on it again.
How cool is that?
So, yeah, it's the way the world works. Same.
It
I mean, every single time any guest, I've told everyone, I intuitively have guests on that I'm supposed to learn something from,
Yeah,
as far, as well as my audience and my listeners. So,
totally.
well,
Ah,
Jen,
well, thank you so much for having me again. It has been truly a pleasure.
it
And
has been.
yeah, and here's
Tell
to
everyone where you can find your, I thought it was on a
awesome.
ticker.
Okay,
Where's the
so
ticker?
the ticker just isn't the ticker was like, yeah, no, you don't need a ticker.
Where you saw me put that.
I did. And it was like, yeah, no, you don't need to worry about the ticker. So, my book, Empathic Mastery, a 5-step system to go from emotional hot mess to thriving success. Really easy. empathicmasterybook.com. So head on over to empathicmasterybook.com to get a copy of the book and really learn about how to navigate, like how to recognize what's yours and not yours, how to release toxic energy that you've been absorbing, how to protect yourself psychically, emotionally, and physically, and also how to replace negativity with positivity and light, and how to live in alignment with your highest good by taking actions that support it. So, that's what this is, empathicmasterybook.com. And to just be part of my world and learn more about my stuff, come join my free Facebook group. All kinds of, lots of, I love sharing information. That is just go visit empathicmastery.com. And I will just say also, I'm going to be interviewing you
Yes.
sometime soon for the Empathic Mastery Show. I am not a live show, so I record things and then they get released over time. But you can also come on over and check out my podcast, all about all things empath. It's like we talk empath, all day, every day. And that is at empathicmasteryshow.com.
And I was gonna say, well, first of all, happy late anniversary.
Thank
Is it
you.
late?
It
It's late.
was yeah, it was on
Okay.
the 23rd. We had our 21st wedding anniversary. So our marriage is now old enough to drink.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, but I was going to say, happy late anniversary, but also subscribe to Jen's newsletters. They're amazing.
Oh, thank you.
And it's so, I love the way the language, the voice you write in, because it's exactly how you talk, and I love that, because when people do that, first of all, I know it's them writing
Mhm.
it and not
Yeah.
some AI mass email, whatever system. And so it's more personalized, but I hear you
Yeah.
and your personality coming through in your newsletters, and I just love that, because it's literally like you're there teaching me and
Yeah.
giving me this wisdom in your newsletter. So
Oh, thank you.
sign up for her newsletter.
Thank
Um,
you. Which you can do by visiting empathicsensitivity.com. Yeah. Yeah. And I teach a lot of stuff through the newsletter. If you sign up, you'll
yes.
get a ton of support, a ton of information, and all kinds of opportunities. And I mean, we are going to be launching the or not the beta, this Mach 2, like Empathic Mastery Academy 2.0 is going live and is going to be starting with the first class. We're going to have our first meeting gathering on Thursday. And I'm very excited about that. I've been gearing up for this and getting ready for this. And the universe kept on throwing curveball after curveball at me from like November of 2019 until now. And now they're like, you must do this no matter what. Like they're just like, it is going to happen. So I'm
It's
going to
like me
be,
and my book and my website and everything.
oh,
People are like, "Why is it taking you?" Because I had to make 3, not just
because,
1,
and
because
it
there's
takes,
3 of me.
and because
That's
it
why.
takes the time that it takes. It totally takes the time that
And
it takes.
and I know better, because every time the universe is like, "Nope. Nope." Because the first anything I made, the first website, the first, banner, anything, I paid someone to do it. I'm
Hmm.
perfectly capable, and then obviously I was like, wow, that looks like some mass-produced template, and I just spent a lot of money for nothing, because I don't like. And they're like, here's my guides, like,
Mhm,
mhm.
mhm.
Maybe if you'd start listening to us. Yeah, probably. I swear they probably think I'm like Helen Keller. I can't.
I think I
uh,
this I my experience is that they are very compassionate towards us human beings. Like, I kind of like, I don't know, like, I have this image of like, like a big old grandmother, who's just kind of like looking, going, like, you guys are just so silly.
yeah.
But I just don't think they have the kind of like judgment towards us that we have towards ourselves. Like they're just kind of like, yeah, you'll figure it out. I will say personally that I am a really huge fan of templates that I then get to go in and adapt. I
Oh.
really love working with that. And actually, a lot of the a lot of the email writing that I'm doing, I'm part of a really amazing email membership club by a woman named Liz Wilcox, who I'm actually going to be interviewing pretty soon because Liz is one of us. And Liz, but the thing about the way Liz offers email, she offers like a flow and sort of like, here, do this, do this, do this. But it's like you can really put your own words into it. So, but I find that Liz and I, like our brains just like do this together really well. Like we write really well together because
Mhm.
I've actually like done sessions with Liz where we've talked to each other. But I love, I just want to say that even if you want to write, like I will often start with some kind of really, really loose outline or framework. And then
Oh.
Right. And
Yeah. I'm not
yeah,
saying templates are I
yeah.
use templates too
Templates,
for
I love
inspiration and everything
templates.
else.
I
I'm
love
talking
templates.
about the mass marketing
Oh,
emails you
yeah,
get
those
that are
awful
like,
AI stuff where you're
dear,
just like,
right,
it is so
dear so
generic.
and so, good morning,
Good
blah blah
morning.
blah. Yeah, and
Or
I'm like,
when
that's
somebody uses like, I have a friend who I can always tell when her copywriter has changed because suddenly the terms of endearment go from the ones that she uses to something
right.
completely different, and I'm like, "This is not her language, this is not her
Hmm.
vocabulary, this does not sound like her." And that's one of the things that I really like when I'm writing for my newsletter especially, I really love to write in a way that it's like, "You guys know that I'm telling you
Yeah,
about
yeah.
my,
No,
like."
I wasn't referring to like outlines or even verbiage or anything, but I'm talking about if you just let somebody else or something else, someone else, whatever, write everything for you and you don't ever go back over it or like personalize it a little bit, that's the type of,
Oh,
because
yeah.
then you don't know what's going on.
I had
And
no idea.
it's not your and I think that's something that's important to
I
empaths too,
agree.
because
Yeah.
we're so we can see through authenticity
We totally can.
that
Well,
we
and
can't do that ourselves because it would drive, well, I know
well,
for
yeah,
myself, it
and
would
I
drive
mean,
me
if you're
crazy as
working with
well.
empaths and intuitives and psychics, it's like you have to be the real deal because they
Yeah.
can see through bullshit, like, immediately. So, yeah, I mean,
And we
to
don't have filters, and
no.
some people don't, well, people eventually appreciate that, I've learned. Like most of my good
Mhm.
friends, I probably made cry the first time. Not even on purpose, I obviously don't intentionally. It's just I I'm blunt and I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I
just
mean,
can't.
I would much rather deal with blunt I would much rather know where I'm at than deal with, like, I mean, social games have always baffled me. They just don't make any sense whatsoever. I'd much rather be around somebody and just, like, who's telling the truth
Yes.
and not mincing words. Yeah. Ah, I my Lilu is, like, looking at me like, "Come on, when are you gonna be
Yes,
done
you
here?"
have
So
to go, and I have to eat dinner, but
yes.
it has been a pleasure, Jen, as always.
Oh,
I
Trish,
I
it
was
has
so
truly
excited.
been a delight. Yeah.
I love talking to you,
Me
and
too. Right back at you.
I will have to. I'll definitely post on my page when my interview with her is going to be coming up, and obviously I'm going to have her back on again to
To tap!
to
We'll
talk
talk about
about.
EFT.
I'm not even
Yeah.
gonna like. I'm not even gonna make a to talk about whatever the universe wants us to talk
Actually,
about.
that is
Apparently,
probably true. It is gonna
because
be it's the Trish and Jen show, and we will see where the universe wants to take us. Yeah.
all right, everyone. So be safe. Have a good week. I hope you're getting over that equinox energy and made it through made it through the weekend with that. Tune in next week, Monday night. Not well, as you all know now, 8 p.m. ish Central Time here on 105.3 New Orleans and United Public Radio Network. So have a good night, everyone. Be safe.